What do you want to be when you grow up? To be asked that when you're 14 or 15 is like, oh, I don't know. I don't know who I am, never mind who I want to be. You always have that question early on about, what do you do for work? And I said, I work in government. And his answer was also nothing then.
Hi, I'm Steve Duke and this is the Two Roads podcast. Today on the show I have Chris Bohane. Chris is an Irish guy and he's living here in Sydney, where I'm based as well. So we had the luxury of catching up in person, which is really nice for a change. He currently works for the New South Wales government in their Department of Education, where he helps bridge the gap between employers and young people who are coming out of education and looking to enter the workforce. And through this role, he has a really fascinating insight into the big trends that are happening in the world of work, both within young people who are coming out of education and entering the workforce, but also the needs of companies and of employers. And we talk about a lot of those trends on the show. Before all this, however, he studied as an engineer, which is how I originally know him. He had a few other jobs, including working in aviation finance, which is this really niche industry, but also super fascinating and one that a lot of top achievers end up going to work in. On this episode, you will hear about what most people, including myself, get wrong about working in the public sector, why Chris finds so much energy and meaning from his work, the big trends that are causing young people to struggle when transitioning from school into work, Chris's advice for anybody who's moving country, and there's a lot of people who are moving country now, especially post-COVID, so that's hopefully a really helpful section of this podcast. What the hell aviation finance and aircraft leasing is. We nerded out on this for potentially a bit too long, but I thought it was super interesting. And also the morning habit that Chris has been doing for 4.5 years that brings him a lot of joy. If you haven't listened to episode 17, the latest episode with Joe Williams, once you finish this one, go back and give it a whirl. Joe has lived a fascinating life. He's been a professional rugby player, champion boxer, an author. Now he's the founder of a mental health education and suicide prevention business. He's also just a really beautiful storyteller, and he has some great lessons for us all on finding purpose in your life. Also, if you want more content about how to find a job and a life that you love, go and follow me on socials. So on LinkedIn, you can just get me on my personal account at Steve Duke. And then on Instagram, you can follow the podcast account, which is at Two Roads Pod. TWOROADS Pod. But for now, I hope you enjoy my chat with Chris Bohane. Let's get into it. First question that I asked everybody, you probably know what it is, but it's, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So I think since I was about 4, I was always convinced that I wanted to be a vet. And I was like, I had blinkers on when I was in school. Like that was all I wanted to do. Which is kind of comforting in a way, because you're absolutely sure about this decision that you've made. So I kind of went through school knowing that was what I wanted to do. And then when I was in transition year in TY, I did work experience. And I think I had 1 week of work experience with a horse vet and 1 week of work experience with a small animal vet. And I still remember the first day of my work experience, I got out of the car and it was like basically on a farm. And the vet was like, hey, come over here. Yeah, you're that guy. Come over here. And he was standing in a stable and he was doing like dentistry on a horse. And dentistry on a horse is not pretty. And he got me to he was like, come in here. And he was like, stand there. And he put the horse's chin up on my shoulder and he was like, hold the horse's head still. And got me to basically put my hand in the horse's mouth and pull its tongue out to the side to keep it out of the way. And I was like, oh God, this is not what I saw on TV and what I thought being a vet was going to be.
Do you think you're going to be saving golden retrievers?
It's running around with golden retrievers outside the veterinary hospital that have gotten better. Like it's just so far from that. And it was actually good to have both, because even within veterinary, it's so different being that type of vet to being a vet that works with cats and dogs. So I was happy that I sort of got to do both. But kind of came to the end of that experience and I was like, okay, this is definitely not for me. And I can't really put my finger on what it was. I didn't really mind the gory side of it. Didn't really mind, I still like being around animals because that was what I kind of liked as a kid. But whatever about what it was, I was like, I just can't see myself doing this job. And then it was kind of back to square one, really.
Do you still like animals? You have a dog, right?
Yeah, have a dog. Like him sometimes, like him most of the time. Don't have a horse. And it was always kind of, and I think it's pretty good, like solid advice for kids is to like, kind of follow the stuff that you're interested in. And the other interest that I had was airplanes. So I was like, right, I've kind of ruled out the animal side of things. So let's think about the airplane side of things. And I think you have that conversation with your career, the one conversation with your career advisor. And she suggested, because I was good at maths, she suggested engineering. And I thought, okay, like maybe I'll do aeronautical engineering. Like I loved watching all the videos about, making the A380 and those documentaries. So ended up doing engineering in UCD, sort of thinking that I'd go down that aeronautical route eventually. And then I think it was maybe after my like first year of college, or somewhere around those kind of early years, I read a newspaper article about aircraft leasing. And I'd never heard of this industry before. And I, did a bit of research, did a bit of Googling. And again, I suddenly had this clarity and, made this decision. I was like, that's what I want to do. And again, kind of had blinkers on for the next 4 years of college until I finished. And that was like the end goal, was to get into the industry. And I did. Yeah, I was very lucky. There was one particular company that had a graduate program. So I was like, right, well, that's kind of the easy way in. Just kind of did the interview process when I was in my last year of college, and then had a summer off, and then started working in that industry.
Yeah. So I want to come back to aircraft leasing because I think it's a wonderfully niche industry, that frankly I don't know much about. But I want to jump forward a bit to what you do now. So how do you describe what you do now?
I work for the New South Wales government. So in Australia, we have a state government and a federal government. And I work in the state side of things. And I work in a part of the government that helps businesses in New South Wales to build partnerships with schools. And businesses tend to sort of come to us wanting to build those partnerships for one of two reasons. One of them is that they want to sort of do that grassroots workforce attraction. So people coming through school are thinking about what I want to do when they finish, and these industries want to make sure that their industry is on the radar of these people. So, getting them in front of groups of kids and helping them to talk about their careers, that's kind of one side of things. The other kind of type of organization that comes to us is organizations that want to, do the sort of more kind of social program. So, it could be like under an ESG strategy, and they want to equip young people with the skills and the knowledge that they need to kind of kickstart their careers. And
these are all probably like pretty big businesses.
It's such a mix. Like it's everybody from, a sole trader, like, a mom and dad business that, own a cafe, all the way up to, all the big sort of Fortune 500 tech companies. And so all sorts of businesses. And it really, a huge part of my job is really, speaking with the businesses and really trying to understand what their pain points are, why they've come to us in the first place, what they're trying to achieve, what success looks like, and then working backwards from there to see how we can help them. Gotcha.
So what would like a typical day look like for you?
So we have a team of a team that are based all around New South Wales, and they work sort of locally with businesses to build these programs and build these initiatives to help them to create those school partnerships. And I sit on the management team for the program. So my day is sort of split half between helping my team to do their job. And so, that kind of, I guess, day to day, just helping them out in whatever it is that they need. And then the other part of my day is working directly with businesses, speaking to them about what their challenges are, doing that sort of discovery type sessions with them, and then either helping them myself directly or putting them in contact with people in my team, help them to, whatever it is, the goal that they want to achieve by connecting with us. A huge part of this picture is also the school side of things, because that's who they're trying to, build the connections with. So also do a lot of work with teachers, with careers advisors in schools, and helping understand what it is that the kids are looking for, and what it is that we can sort of connect them in with in those businesses. And really it all sort of comes back to career planning. So helping young people to, make good decisions about their careers.
Is the end outcome of a lot of the work that say you or your team does, like where does the rubber meet the road? Is it like workshops that these businesses hold with students in schools? Are there other parts of like the end outcome from all the work that you guys are doing, or like, where does the kind of stuff happen?
Yeah, so it could be something like a workshop. It could be taking a group of students into a workplace and doing an immersion day. It could be taking somebody from a business into a school and doing talks. It could be building out a mentor program that happens over the course of a term. It could be a program where you take groups of girls in high school into industries that are traditionally male dominated and building a program that's specially for them. It could also be trying to help people to get jobs. So students coming up to the summertime, trying to come up with initiatives that ultimately end up in them getting employed in these businesses as well. So really, really varied. And again, very much sort of depends on the business that's coming to us.
Okay, hold up 1 second. I'm sorry to have to interrupt this episode, but I do want to remind you that if you want more content on how to find a job and a life that you love, you can find it on our socials. So on Instagram, go to 2 Roads Pod, and on LinkedIn, just find my personal account called Steve Duke. And of course, these podcasts are released weekly where I interview people, and that's extremely helpful for people to get inspiration and hear other people's stories and how they did it and what they're going through. But I also release a ton of other content as well to help you both figure out what it is that you want to do and also how to then make that actually happen. So LinkedIn and Instagram. At LinkedIn, Steve Duke, just my name. And then on Instagram, you can find us at 2 Roads Pod. Gotcha. That makes total sense. What strikes me about what you do is that it seems very tangible. Like, 'cause all of those things, like they're in the calendar. Like, they happen on a certain date. People have to be in a certain place at a certain time. Yeah. Do you like that element of the work? I'm coming from a place where, like, the work that I've done for the past, say, 3 years, it's like everyone's remote. Like, very little stuff actually happened in person at a location on a certain time on a certain date where people had to be there. It was a very, like, ephemeral kind of type of work, and oftentimes I would have craved doing something in person. Like, I remember the 1 or 2 times that we had an event to go to, or that we actually had like a physical shoot that we had to go to. Like, I loved those because I was like, I spent so much of my life was just like Zoom calls, right? Whereas, like, this is just something tangible about the work that you're doing. Do you like that element, or is it a grass is always greener and it's not actually that fun?
No. That's one of the favorite parts of my job. Like, the days where I go to one of these events or take part in one of the workshops, like, I come away from those days and I'm absolutely full of energy. And it's it's one of the great things about sort of working in this team, and one of the great things about my team is I'll chat to one of them at the end of the day and I'll say, how was your day? And I've never worked in an organization where so many people say, I had the best day and I have the best job in the world and I absolutely love what I do, because they're creating these programs and they're creating these workshops, and then you get to sit in a room and see young people's faces light up, and you get to see them, make decisions, you get to see them get jobs. And a lot of the people that we try and work with sort of on the school side of things, a lot of the times it's kids that don't normally get these opportunities. So these kids that are sort of in disadvantaged schools, we try and do a lot of work with Aboriginal communities as well. And there's just so much impact that these interactions can have. Just by a young person meeting somebody from an industry that has never even entered their world before. And all of a sudden they have this little piece of information and that little kind of spark inside in them, and you just don't know where it can take them. But again, it's really easy to motivate people, and it's really easy to motivate yourself, I think, when you work in a job like that, because like you said, there's an immediate outcome from it, and you can see what it is. And yeah, I just feel super energized at the end of those days. Yeah, absolutely.
I think, like, when I hear you talk about this, and like the people who are on your team and saying, oh my god, I had the best day ever, and you know, seeing the faces of kids light up, I'm like, of course that's a good job, of course that's meaningful. But most of us don't go and do stuff like that.
No.
Most of us still get tempted into, you know, some job that's going to let us, you know, work from home and give us free lunch and comes with a bit of status or a better salary or whatever else. Like, not that these jobs aren't well paid, I'm sure they are, but you know, that's what we get attracted to, I think, especially earlier in our careers. But all the evidence says that if you do something that you find meaningful and you get purpose from, you're going to be happier.
Yeah.
Like, why do you think that we just can't get that into our heads?
Yeah, and it's a real privilege, definitely. And you know, sometimes, like, I think what I've realized is that, like, every job has shit bits to it, and there's every job that has annoying bits to it. But it's so different when you have to, you know, you have to work longer hours, you have to do this thing that you really don't want to do, when you know that at the end of the day it's benefiting a young person, and you know that there's a really good reason for it, and it's not just because my boss has set this arbitrary deadline, or we have this, you know, this difficult stakeholder that I have to appease. Like, there's a real positive social outcome from it as well. So it's very easy to motivate yourself, like I said, and it's also very easy to motivate other people when that's what the outcome is. It's such a good question, and I've been through that as well. Like, you know, I probably had.
You worked in aviation finance, like that's really...
I worked in aviation finance, like it's the polar opposite to what I do now. And I've had experiences of, I'll never forget, I met a person once, just, you know, we were going away for a weekend, and somebody else like came along, and you know, you always have that question early on about, oh, you know, what do you do for work? And I said, oh, I work in government, and his answer was also nothing then. And you know, I was like, God, you know, that just says a lot about your sort of prejudices that you have to working in government. And I think this was everybody does not react like that by any means, but I definitely think there's a certain idea that people have about what it means to sort of work in these jobs. But when you live it day to day, and when you see the impact that you have on people's lives, I'm like, there's so much value and there's so much worth in this work. And sure, you know, government bureaucracy is a real pain sometimes, and it can be slow to change, but I genuinely believe that everybody that I work with is really trying to have a positive impact on other people's lives. And it's, you know, I think some people get their views on what it's like to work in sort of the civil service from, like, you know, Parks and Rec or something like that. And there's definitely elements of it that are like that, but I think New South Wales in particular is a, you know, super progressive public service. You know, a lot of people that, if you live in Sydney, people have used Service New South Wales. Like, even that as an example of how the government has been able to, you know, digitize and streamline the interactions that people have with the government, is, you know, streets ahead of, I think, lots of other countries and lots of other states. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, it's so good. Yeah. And I work with really smart, really talented people as well. So I think, yeah, a lot of the stereotypes that I even would have had, you know, sort of going into that sector have just so not been true.
Yeah. I think I would be, definitely at times would have been guilty of having like those stereotypes as well. But I think honestly, I think well, this is a bit kind of, it's not great for me to say it because I'm not working in the public sector, but like, I do often think that not enough smart people, or people in general, are going to work in the public sector right now. And I think if you went back to like the 60s or 70s, I'm thinking more about America because that's like, I don't know, the culture that I'm aware of from the 60s and 70s. But like, having a government job was actually like was the like high status like job to have. Like, if you're working in public service in like an agency or whatever else, that was like the really cool job to have. Whereas like, it seems to have shifted a bit more, like whether, you know, it was finance, it still is obviously in certain industry or certain like countries, tech, and then in the last kind of 10, 15 years has came up as like the sexy new industry. But it seems like there's not enough like really smart, there are lots of smart people going into it, but I'm just like, I wish there was more. Because if you look at like all the big problems that we're going to have to solve, like a lot of them are going to come from government. And then like you've got people sitting outside government giving out about it, but like not willing to go and actually work in it to actually change anything.
Totally. And I think it's one of the most important things that I think people have to do when they're thinking about, if you're a 16-year-old thinking about what you want to do in your career, if you're later in life, is to like test your assumptions and speak to people that work in these industries. Because like me, wanting to be a vet, I was so convinced that was what I wanted to do. And then I spent 10 minutes being a vet and absolutely hated it. And every idea that I had in my head about what it meant to be a vet was just so not the experience that I had. And I think that's the same in government. Like that's been my experience. Is it's really different to what I expected. And like I think the public sector is somewhere where you can build a really good career, and it's not like the pay and the benefits are also like pretty good. It's not like it's a sector where you're going to go in and you're not going to earn any money and you're going to be struggling. Like it's absolutely not like that. And again, I think in particular, New South Wales government it's a really good place to work. They have it's a really good working culture. And I think a lot of people sort of I think a lot of people maybe when they first leave college and they enter the workplace and they might sort of chase the status of a particular job, or they might sort of chase the money of a particular job. I think for a lot of people, you end up questioning that after a certain point. And then people sort of end up in this situation of, oh God, well, how do I where do I go with this? Is this really what I want to do? And I think a lot of people sort of end up in these kind of, quarter life crisis where they're in these jobs that they're, not sure if that's what they want to do.
100%. I mean, ultimately that's kind of the premise of the whole podcast, right? Because I think exactly that happens. Like I've just seen so many people like around our age, like my friends, people that I know, colleagues who, came out of college, ticked all the boxes, super high achievers, went after the big job, got it, nailed it, did really well for like 5, 6, 7 years, and they kind of got everything. And like, don't get me wrong, they have great lives, but they're kind of like, looking around, there's a bit more to it than this. Like I kind of have everything. I've got the nice holiday, nice apartment, nice car, whatever else. But like looking for a bit more. I think that's exactly like, why probably a lot of people listen to this podcast, because they're going through that journey and trying to think what it is that they would want to do. And oftentimes I think that, it's a bit simplistic, but I think the answer is probably finding a job that you find more meaning from, that you get more like intrinsic motivation from, as opposed to like extrinsic motivation from like status or income or benefits or whatever else. Kind of a random question that pops into my head there, which is like, when you're, say, in New South Wales government, what's like the really cool area that everybody wants to work in?
If you can think of any sort of cool area in the workplace in general, you might think of, I want, emerging technologies or artificial intelligence or, green technology. Government has probably tapped into every single one of those areas. So you can pretty much think of any of that sort of like really future thinking industries, and there'll be a part of government that is tapped into it and that is working with it. There's a part of the government called in New South Wales called Investment New South Wales, and they work on investment attraction strategies. So helping other businesses to understand the benefits of setting up in Australia, helping tap into the sort of skills needs that, say, if you're a green tech company and you want to set up in Australia, they'll help you come up with ways to make sure that you can tap into the skilled workforce. So I think any sort of any of those kind of future focused industries, there's going to be ways that you can at least be close to it working in government. And that's one of the other things, like government is huge. I think the New South Wales government is probably the largest employer in the country when you take into account all of the teachers and healthcare staff. Hundreds of thousands. Yeah, it's a huge employer. But again, and that's again one of the things things you need to consider is working in government is one thing, but there's so many different things that you can do within government. Working in finance is one thing. There's so many different things that you can do within finance. So you think you need to just yeah, it's one thing about understanding the sector, but then it's another thing trying to understand the sort of jobs within that sector as well.
Yeah, such a great point. Like, you do something that big, there's going to be so many different types of roles, departments, teams, doing all sorts of different stuff that you can explore. So you obviously spend a lot of time working with employers, but also like young people who are like coming into the workforce. So you have a pretty good view in terms of like the trends that are happening there. So we talked about a little bit about this before, but like, what are the trends that you're seeing like with young people who are kind of coming out now and like looking for a job in the workforce?
I think there's some things that probably have been the same forever. I think if you ask, me or you what you wanted to be when you were coming out of school, like, you don't really know a lot. Your view of the world is probably fairly small. And I think that's the same for young people now. Like, they just, unless it's something that their parents did or that, something that the careers advisor did, they're still really trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up and answer that question. So I think fundamentally a lot of the sort of, a lot of the stuff has probably not changed a lot. I think what probably has changed, and I think we probably still don't quite understand the impact that COVID had on young people. They're such kind of formative years when you're in your teenage years, and kids were, rather than, having face-to-face human interactions, learning those people skills, people were learning from behind a screen. And, we all know, for many of us that have worked from home, it's really, really hard to pay attention on Zoom or on Teams calls. And we were sitting people in front of a screen for, 6 hours a day. Cameras off a lot of the time, because you're not really allowed to sort of use cameras when you're teaching online. So I think that has had a real impact on young people. Yeah, it really does, and we've all been on those kind of Zoom calls as well, where, if it's the kind of online training that you do in work and there's one person talking and 30 people listening, like, we're all off doing other things. And it's so easy to do that when you're sitting in front of a laptop. So, young people had 2 years of that essentially, and I think that really has had an impact on, their motivations, sort of how they're equipped to basically leave school and enter the workplace.
Like from an education perspective, or like socially, or
both. I think particularly on the social skills side of things. You sort of read in the news a lot of the time now about the teacher shortages and the issues that schools are having with teachers, and I think a part of the problem the teachers are having as well is that it's the social skills that the kids have are quite challenging. So there's a lot of sort of, challenging behavior in the classrooms that teachers are trying to manage, and teachers are just getting burnt out. And on the other side of things, the kids that are coming out of school are fundamentally different to what they were, or what sort of kids were coming out of school were like a couple of years ago. But on the workplace side of things, workers or organizations are probably expecting a certain type of person coming into their workplace, just like the person that they had coming into their workplace 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and they're just fundamentally not. So the expectations of employers probably haven't quite caught up with how the people that are coming into their workplace have changed.
And is it that they're typically, not as mature as the workers might have been 5 years ago because they missed these 2 years of socializing, or what are the dimensions that employers are looking for, that employers are kind of getting surprised by?
One of the ones that I hear a lot is like the work ethic. Like, oh, young people just don't want to work these days. Like, I think, like, I hear that as well about people that are my age. So it's hard to know, like, I'm only experiencing this for the first time in my life, so it's hard to know if every sort of generation goes through this change, and if it's a constant thing. But that's certainly one that comes up a lot, is kind of the capacity that young people have to just deal with work and to deal with the challenges of work. And work can be a really confronting place if you're coming straight out of school and you're going into, I know it's one thing if you're sort of going into a graduate program or a training program or something like that, but it's a whole other thing if you're coming out of school and you're working in a big car mechanic. Or you're working on a building site, and you're sort of thrown into this world and you have to deal with adults, and if you don't really, that takes quite a lot of sort of social skills and self-awareness to be able to deal with that. So I think there's a lot of young people that are really kind of struggling with that transition into work.
I don't know if this is something that you cover like in the work that you do, but I'm very interested in how we can help kids make better career decisions at like the early stages, which is definitely like some of the stuff that you focus on. But one of the big things to me seems that like the more careers that we can make them aware of, the more jobs that they know are out there, the better that they can choose, you know, whether they want to go to university or not. If they do want to go to university, what do they study? Because they've got an idea of what job they might want to do in the future, rather than just being like, hey, you're good at maths, you should go and do engineering. Is there anything that, you know, you or your team or the broader kind of department does to help with that? Or is there any kind of like thinking around how do we make people aware of more jobs other than, you know, like doctor, teacher, nurse and whatever their parents do?
Yeah. We you know, you come from a marketing background, right? So like when I'm sort of speaking to my team about how we put these programs together, I try and use the funnel that you use for marketing and sales and apply that to careers. So I think at the top of the funnel, there's the awareness. And it's how do we come up with initiatives that help young people, just like you said, to generate awareness about industries, to get an awareness about the jobs in the industry. And the critical bit is also to get an awareness about themselves. So to really try and understand what your strengths are, what the kind of stuff is that gives you energy, what your passions are, what you want your life to look like. So that's the first thing we always try and do when we come up with an initiative. It's, you know, how do we just get them to know about this industry? And that could be something as simple as bringing them on a tour of a workplace, or doing a speed networking session where they might meet 10 different employers at one time and 10 very different employers. So that's the kind of top of the funnel, and that's where most of our that's sort of where you would have most of the students that are going through. Where we go from there then is, we call it explore and experience. So you've got this awareness now of cybersecurity as an industry, and you kind of think that this is something that you might be interested in. Then what we want to do is give you an opportunity to actually experience it and to test out whether your assumptions about that industry were true. And no different to me doing work experience as a vet and realizing that wasn't for me. That's what we try and do with young people. So creating immersion days for them, you know, sort of simple work experience opportunities. And I think work experience needs to be curated a little bit as well. I think a lot of people have probably had an experience of work experience where you're getting the coffees, you're doing the printing. So we really try and design it so you actually experience what it's like. And there's a bit of work that organizations have to do to, you know, design something like that and to facilitate something. So that's kind of the middle of the funnel. And then the bottom of the funnel is really we call it the pathways to pursue. So that's, right now I've decided I want to work in security or cybersecurity. I think I'm sort of interested in the penetration testing side of it. How do I get that job? So what are my options? Do I have to go to university? Is there a direct entry out of school program? Is there a vocational education and training option? Can I get a job over the summer because I'm not finished school yet? So everything that we try and fit into that funnel. And I think if you sort of follow that approach, whether you're 16 or whether you're later on in life trying to make a decision about your career, I think you just end up sort of coming to the end of that funnel, so to speak, so much more informed about what you want to do with your career. And I think the issue that a lot of people face is that they start at the bottom of the funnel and they look at LinkedIn or you look at Seek, and you're at the bottom of the funnel there because you're just looking at the end goal, which is the job. And I think you actually kind of need to separate yourself from that a little bit and just focus on starting at the start and just expanding your awareness.
This sounds fantastic. It sounds really good. Like, yeah. I'm kind of like, I wish, you know, I was exposed to this system like when I was going through school, because I don't know if there's any I'm sure there is some sort of equivalent piece of work that's going on around like through schools. Like there definitely is, but it doesn't seem like it cracked the code, at least for me. I don't feel like I was exposed to that much at all.
And I think it's hard when you have, a lot of the time you have one careers advisor and hundreds of students. So it's really, and that's just how it's always been, you know, in a lot of the cases. And I think it's really hard if you are in a careers advisor position to be able to put these things together for students. And that's really where we try and come in our work, is to we design these programs and we offer them to the schools to take part in, and we work with the careers advisors to find out where the interests of the students are. But I don't think, you know, certainly in my experience of school, there wasn't enough time that I had doing that sort of exploration, you know.
So I was talking to my dad about this recently, because he was a principal and vice principal for I don't know, 20 something years. And I was talking to him about this. I was like, how do we help, like, what are we doing to help like kids like discover more careers, like figure out what they really want to do? And he made a good point, which is certainly true in Ireland, which is that in a school, the career guidance person and the counsellor is actually the same person. And they're two completely different jobs. Yeah. Because on one side, you're trying to understand what somebody's strengths are, what they enjoy, and understand all the different career paths that are available to them, and then help them like discover those and go down that funnel as you're talking about. The other job as a counsellor is like dealing with all of the shit that happens in kids' lives in school, which is like a completely different job. And in schools we're just like, oh yeah, you can be the same person, like go in and do the same. It's like, of course they can. And I think probably what realistically happens is most of these people are overworked, and like the priority is going to come for like the counselling side, because that's like the much more urgent problem like to deal with, which is actually pretty fair. Is it different in New South Wales? Like, are they different roles in schools, or are they also the same, but you look to give more support on the career guidance side of things?
It's very different depending on the school. So you might have some schools where a careers advisor is only actually a careers advisor for 2 days a week, and they might be teaching English for the other 3 days a week. So there's a lot of sort of, I think particularly because schools are so short-staffed at the moment, there's a lot of sort of mixing of roles and responsibilities. So you'll absolutely have a careers advisor that might be super invested in careers, but just doesn't have the time to dedicate to it because they need to sort of direct their attention to other stuff. And actually, one careers advisor that I met last week or the week before, she made such a good point, which was that the question that's always asked, and something that I said a couple of minutes ago, is this question of what do you want to be when you grow up? And she says that she's completely stopped using that over the last couple of years in her career, and the only question that she asks her students is, where do you want to start? And I'm like, I love that. Like, that's such a good way to look at it, because most of us probably never even heard of the jobs that we were in now when we were 16. Like, I couldn't tell you that I wanted to be a senior XYZ at Department of ABC at New South Wales Government, because I didn't even know that job existed. And when we're in school, we just think that, think of, vet, lawyer, doctor, engineer, nurse, teacher. And I love that when you just flip it on your head and you say, where do you want to start with your career journey? And that might just be a super general degree that leans into the strengths and the skills that you have. And that'll probably change as you learn more about yourself, learn more about the world, learn more about that degree, and get exposure to different careers throughout whatever it is the education pathway that you go down. It takes the pressure off, because it's this huge question that people like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Seems like such an important decision that just has so much consequence. And to have to make that one, and to be asked that when you're 14 or 15 is like, oh, I don't know, like, how am I meant? I don't know who I am, never mind who I want to be.
And when I'm 21, 31, 41, 51, exactly. Because like the chance that I'm doing the same thing at each of those ages is like incredibly low. Exactly. And yeah, every time I ask that question, like almost one of the reasons I ask it is to, in some ways, show that the person is never doing what they thought they would be doing with it. Like, and it's rarely even close. No.
And what I've also realized, and like even just talking to friends about their career journeys, is you can like, and I like to sort of like, I like to analyze things, and I like to think things through and make a decision, and I still do that. But often it's the tiniest 10 seconds that completely changes the course of what you do. And for me, it was the fact that I read a newspaper article one day and heard about this concept of aircraft leasing. For other people, it might be one conversation that they had at a careers expo, or one conversation that they had with somebody. So as much as we can really try and plan these things, sometimes it's just about these little interactions that you have as you're living your life, and that sort of light a spark, and that really changed the direction of your career. So I can certainly get caught up in trying to like overanalyze these things, but when I sort of take a step back and realize that actually the things that have really changed the direction of my career and changed the direction of my life have just been things that happened totally by chance.
Yeah, so I completely agree, because I think a couple of episodes ago, when I was the interviewee for a change, and I was being asked about all these different parts of my career and the decisions I made, and I started looking back on it and realized that actually I hadn't planned this out at all. It was pure chance. I decided I wanted to go work at McKinsey. I even learned about McKinsey because I decided one day to go to the UCD Careers Fair, and I liked the suits that the guys were wearing at the McKinsey stand, and I'd been watching the TV show Suits at the time, and I was like, oh, they look pretty cool. That's what I want to do, and that's how I made the decision. I joined Wayflyer because I got a random email from a guy that I used to work at McKinsey. Didn't plan that at all. But then the question comes up for me, right, is if so much of our career / general life is down to these like small moments and luck and things that we can't plan for, how do you behave like knowing that? Because it seems also not a good idea to just be like, I'm going to leave it all up to chance.
Yeah.
So like, how do you balance those two facts?
I think one part of it is just is to, I guess, live your life in such a way that there's more of a chance of those things happening, and that's kind of like living your life, and I kind of call it like an expansive way. So you're saying yes to opportunities, you're trying to open up your world a little bit. That doesn't necessarily need to be moving to Australia, which is where we're coming from now. But just sort of talking to different people, being open to new ways of thinking, and that's where those sparks come from, in my experience, is just kind of saying yes to more things and just, experiencing life and experiencing different elements of life. But I also absolutely think that there's the only way that you can sort of grab a hold of those opportunities is if you do sort of do that work and have that foundation of skills and experience and your social skills that let you harness those opportunities. So I think you still need to sort of consider that, and sort of when you're thinking about your career, I think you still need to think about what are the things that sort of might give me a head start. That might be an education, that might be work experience. I think there's so much value in working in hospitality, or I feel like every person in Australia works in McDonald's when they're a teenager. Those types of things as well just help you to build your social skills, and they're the kind of things, building those skill sets that will also just help you to harness those opportunities when they come along. So I think you have to do both.
I think that's actually a great way of framing it, and to kind of both of those come back to like these two like cheesy reels that I keep seeing on Instagram at the minute, but which I actually love. And the first one is about like expanding your surface area of luck, which is exactly like what you're saying. It's just like, okay, you can't decide when you're going to be lucky, but you can do things that make it more likely that luck will strike you. And then the second one is, I saw this one today, it's so dumb, but it was like, you don't have to get ready if you stay ready. Right? but like, yeah. And like maybe this is a bit of a reach to apply to your, you said it much better than this, but like it's like, okay, well, yeah, like when luck does strike, like are you in the position to actually take advantage of it? It's just like, okay, if you get an email introduction out of the blue, or if you get invited to an interview for a job like out of the blue, so okay, you can't go and develop like 2 years worth of skills between when you got that email and your interview. But if you've already developed it, then you're in a position where you can like take advantage of it. But when you're developing it, you may not have known, you weren't developing these skills going, I'm going to get an email in 2 years time and I'm going to be ready for that interview. And
I've been guilty of the like looking at somebody's LinkedIn and I'm like, God, like how did they manage to get to where they are now? Like they must have planned that from when they were in nappies, and I catch myself thinking that way and thinking, what did they decide the whole way through to know that they'd end up as CEO of the world or whatever it is that this amazing job that they have is? But like, I think we all know that it's, like you said, it's really it is obviously there's a lot of sort of hard work that goes into building those skills, but a lot of it is just luck along the way.
100%. So I said we go back to aircraft leasing at some point. And I want to go there now because it's, I honestly, I don't really know what it is. So you're going to have to tell me, well, what is aircraft leasing? Because I think it's actually a interesting industry, especially for anybody who's listening, who's in Dublin, because that seems to be like the hub of it. But like, I'd love to know a little bit more about that industry and what it's actually about.
It actually, and I think I have 60% of this story right, so you'll get the gist of it. But I think as far as I know, the origins of the industry were back when back in the old sort of Aer Lingus days. And Tony Ryan, who is the guy that originally founded Ryanair, was working in Aer Lingus, and there was an old 747, which is a big airplane that used to take people on holidays from Ireland to wherever it was during the summer. And there's obviously so much demand for travel during the summer, but less so in the winter. So they kind of had this, I guess, spare capacity for an aircraft in their off season. And what they decided to do was to lease that aircraft to an airline in another part of the world where there was more demand for aircraft at that particular time. So the industry was kind of, I guess, born in Ireland and has sort of grown up there and turned out to be just a really good sort of business model. And obviously it's very different to that nowadays, but I always compare it to if you had Starbucks, for example. There's loads of different Starbucks that are around a city. Starbucks might own some of those cafes, and some of them they might rent from another organization, but it looks like every other Starbucks. And it's the same if you look at a fleet of aircraft in an airline. Some of them they might own, and some of them they might lease. And it's I guess it's just a decision depending on the strategy of the airline for how they want to, I guess, finance that fleet or that portfolio of aircraft. But when you're sitting on a plane, you don't really know the difference. It could be owned by the airline or it could be owned by a leasing company.
Gotcha. Okay, so the leasing companies actually own.
Correct.
Some of the airline. Do you have any idea for how many, like, what percentage of aircraft are owned by like the airlines versus the leasing companies?
So I think it's half of all of the commercial aircraft in the world are leased, and half of all of that business is done through Ireland. So 25% of all of the airplanes in the world are owned by Irish leasing companies. So it's huge, and airplanes are expensive. Like you don't need to have a lot of them for it to be worth a lot of money. So it's this huge business that obviously has a huge contribution to the Irish economy as well, just, because of the value of those assets that are owned, and when those assets are bought and sold, they're really big transactions that can have quite a big sort of impact on the economy.
So if you're an aircraft leasing company, your job is basically buy airplanes and rent them out, right?
Pretty much.
Right.
Pretty much.
What makes you good at what makes you a good aircraft leasing company? Like, is it that I'm making this like super simplistic, but like you're really good at getting a deal on like buying them, or actually you've got a really high like utilization rate on like how good you are at actually like leasing these out, or the price that you're getting for them, or like, what separates kind of the good ones from the like not so good ones?
Because of the risk involved in buying an aircraft. Like if an aircraft leasing company purchases an aircraft, they're going to be immediately paying the financing for that aircraft, and it's going to be very expensive payments that they have to make. It could be anything from $50 to $150 million for a brand new aircraft. That's US dollars as well. So unless that aircraft is being leased out, it's costing you money. And very similar to if you're a person that owns, if you're a landlord and you own a house and you're paying a mortgage on it, unless there's somebody actually living in it and using it and paying you rent, it's very expensive for you to having it sitting there empty. So I guess what I'm coming back to is it's very high risk business. So if you're not a good aircraft leasing company, you're probably not going to be an aircraft leasing company in the first place. Like, you have to be very good at this to be able to make it work at all, and to even be able to convince people to give you the money to purchase those aircraft. So I think, and the industry has grown a huge amount. It's quite a young industry, but it has really grown a huge amount in, over the last, basically since birth. It's just sort of continued to grow and grow and grow, and there's been new sort of players that have come into the market. So there's probably, when I worked in that industry, you'd sort of hear of the days gone by when there was much less sort of competition, and it was much easier to do those deals. Whereas now, my sense of it is that there's a lot more sort of players at the table, and a lot. If you're trying to get a deal with ABC Airlines, you're now having to compete with a number of different aircraft leasing companies that are all very sort of close in price point, and the things that differentiate those deals is kind of less and less. And an aircraft is really worth nothing unless you have the documentation that goes along, like the maintenance records that go along with an aircraft. Unless you have that, the aircraft itself is pretty much useless, because you have no sort of paperwork that allows you to fly it, and that sort of that tells the regulatory authorities that this aircraft is safe to fly. And that's one of the most expensive parts and one of the kind of riskiest parts of aviation, is the maintenance costs of airplanes, and making sure that whoever owns the airplane or whoever has the airplane has the money that they need to basically do its service that it needs to have every couple of years, like a car has to do, because it's super expensive for airlines to do that.
Yeah, 100%. So if you were working in this industry, so say you've come out of university, you've gone into this job, like what are you doing?
Again, sort of like we were talking about government, there's so many different things that you can do within the industry. I guess some of the sort of broad roles would be the sort of skill sets. Like there's a really important skill set is on the legal side of things. There's very complex contracts that cover an aircraft leasing transaction, and there's usually lots of different people involved. There's also the sort of tax structures, so there's a real need for people with really solid legal skills to be able to manage that side of it. Finance skills, I think, are another thing that's super important in that industry. Again, the financing side of it, the forecasting of an individual aircraft and the finances coming in on that, and the forecasting of your sort of portfolio strategy as well is going to be really important. So you need people with a really solid set of financial skills. So a lot of people going into the industry will be chartered accountants. The other probably big one as well is the commercial side of it. So the people that have the relationships with the airlines, build the relationships with the airlines, and ultimately are the ones that do the deals and place the aircraft with the airlines.
Makes sense. How many aircraft would like a typical leasing company own?
It could be anything. I think the biggest would have over 1,000. Some of the biggest players, and it's billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of airplanes. And you might have some kind of small ones that have just started up that might have 4 or 5. But even 4 or 5 airplanes could be $200 million US.
Presumably they will buy these with debt, right?
Yeah, they'd have I guess much like any company, they'd have different ways of financing them. Some might be from the shareholders, some might be from debt. They also release bonds as well. And that's another really interesting part of that business as well. If you're somebody that's sort of interested in like treasury and funding, again, a huge part of this business is making decisions about how you finance the running of the business.
Yeah. I can, now that you describe it more, I can see why airlines would like to not have to deal with this, because it's like incredibly capital intensive. It's a lot of risk. It's like actually very specialized to be able to understand what like the life of an aircraft might look like and the costs associated with that. And if they're just like, hey, we can outsource this risk, we'll pay you every month or every year or whatever else it is, and we're happy to pay like a little bit of a premium on the cost for that and not have to worry about it, and we'll just focus on the aircraft or the airline side of the.
And aviation is like, I always found it a really interesting industry, but it's there's this expression that everybody in the industry sort of, you'd eventually hear it, but it's that the quickest way to become a millionaire is to start as a billionaire and buy an airline, because airlines traditionally haven't made money. And I think I can't remember what year it was, but I think it was sort of the mid 2010s was the first time that the global aviation industry as a collective ever made money. And it was a combination of low interest rates and low fuel prices is what contributed to it. So it's the first time that industry ever made money. So it's not an industry that has a lot of spare cash to be able to go out and convince banks to give them money to buy aircraft. So this was why it was like a perfect opportunity for leasing companies to exist.
Why don't airlines make money? But like it seems, because I've heard this before, right? That like airlines are bad businesses, like, that story that you told. And I'm like, every time I fly, I'm like, this is amazing. The fact that I just came back from Ireland like a couple of weeks ago, the fact that I can leave Ireland and like 24 hours later I like wake up in Australia,
it's incredible. It's incredible. And I think the consumer in the aviation space has experienced the change to profitability from the consumer side. And if you got on a plane 20 years ago, if you got on an Aer Lingus flight, for example, you would have had as much bag as you want, you would have had a meal, you would have had probably tea and coffee, and all of that I think probably just didn't really work. as a business model. And now when you fly, everything is an additional cost. There's really strict weight restriction because every kilo on the plane costs money because it costs fuel to burn it. So I think we've probably been at the consumers of the aviation industry have probably really noticed the difference in flying over the last maybe 20 years as airlines have had to ultimately become profitable. And I know in Australia, like Qantas is a funny one. Like I've never Australian people love or hate Qantas, and for some people it's almost like their national flag, this airline. But Qantas just gets absolutely dragged through the coals in the Australian press because, they do so much sort of flight cancellations. They've outsourced their baggage and ground handling, and they've paid massive salaries to their CEO, but they report huge profits. So that's probably not really a good example of the right way to do it, maybe. But they're an example of an airline that's become super profitable.
Yeah, I was thinking there when you were talking about the fact that the consumer has probably borne the brunt of airlines trying to like search for profitability, because I have this like notes doc like on my phone where I keep like dumb questions that like come into my head, and like ultimately I want to like figure out the answers to them and like write an essay about them or something. And one of them is like, why has air travel got consistently worse over the last 30 years? Because if you ever go back and you see these videos from people like flying in like the 50s or the 60s, they're basically like flying like first class citizens, but like that was normal.
And that didn't make any money. and historically as well, like airlines, and they still are, like, you saw it through COVID, airlines are propped up by governments because I guess it's like a status symbol for a country to have an airline. Like British Airways is part of British culture. Qantas is part of Australian culture. So they're a lot of the time they're founded by the governments. It's a really smart way for a country, to bring people into the country to trade, to do business. So it makes sense for governments to invest in these organizations. But as things have sort of moved to a more sort of private sector, publicly traded airlines, that's completely changed.
Yeah. Did you like working in the industry?
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. There's a few things. It was very, I love the pace of it. It was super fast paced. Everything happened really quickly. The organization itself was only maybe 150 people. So
that's a nice size.
Right, yeah. Enough to be able to get to know everybody, enough to be able that things could happen quickly if you needed them to, and enough that you could have 75% of the company on one floor of a building. So I really enjoyed sort of how quickly they did business and how quickly people moved. And I worked with super, super, super smart people. Like I learned so much there. Like it was a really good sort of training ground for me coming out of college. The other thing I really loved about working there was that it was like a real global international business. So throughout my day, I might have a call with somebody from Northern Africa. I might have a call with somebody from the Philippines, and then the next day I might be speaking to somebody from London. And I love learning about people's cultures, and I love meeting people that have come from different backgrounds to me, and finding out how we're different, finding out how we're similar, and navigating that. And it was a really interesting part of my job as well, is trying to navigate those cultural differences that you would come across all the time. And I remember one time working on a particular issue that had come up, and one of the people on one of the sides was Dutch. And on the other side, I was working with somebody who was from a Japanese company. And those are two super, very, very, very different cultures and different ways of operating. And I was kind of in the middle trying to mediate this issue. And it's a really good way to learn how to communicate with different people, and how to get buy-in from people who think completely different from you. And how to sort of, how to make those two sides kind of meet and come to whatever the agreement was. And again, like I had such a good experience there. Like I really think I was really lucky to have worked there, and had an offer to stay, and kind of felt like everything was mapped out for me a little bit. And I think I just got cold feet. And I was like, oh God, like I'm not sure. Like I can see there's this amazing opportunity, and I can see the next 10 years and what it's going to look like. And I was like, but I'm not sure that that's quite what I'm ready for yet. And sort of when we, talked about trying to live your life expansively, I wasn't sure that I was like, there's still a little bit more expanding that I need to do. And I think I originally wanted to go to Canada, and was kind of pretty sure that was what I was going to do, and was going to go to Vancouver. And then again, when you talk about those tiny little moments, there was a friend of mine that invited me to his going away party, and I was like, I didn't realize you were going away. Where are you going? And he said he was moving to Sydney, and he told me about this visa that I was able to get as an engineering graduate. And Australia it never was kind of on my radar before that. And then I was like, I gave him a call or chatted to him, and he told me about it, and I was like, maybe I'll do that instead. So again, one of those little moments that completely changed the course of my life.
That's mad. So that's obviously when you moved to Australia then, off the back of that. How long have you been in Australia?
About 4.5 years.
There's a lot of people who've been moving either to Australia or otherwise over the last 12 months, like certainly like post-COVID. I've talked to a few people who've been moving here, who are looking for a job or trying to set up or whatever else. Like my brother moved here at the start of this year. So I've been reflecting on like, we're forced into the position of like giving advice to people who are coming over here. What advice would you have for somebody who's like about to move country, from somebody who's kind of 4.5 years down the road and now looking back on somebody who's at the start of that journey?
I think the one bit of advice that I would give to people is to think long term. I think usually you sort of think short term, probably the length of your visa, but I would tell people to really focus on making decisions in your first 6 months here that are setting yourself up for the long term. And a lot of the time that's the type of work that you do and the type of visa options that you're going to have from doing that work.
So what might that look like practically?
So I have friends that have work in recruitment and never worked in recruitment before, but ended up working in that industry here. It's this huge, amazing industry to work in here, but there's no pathway to permanent residency working in recruitment. And you have people that maybe have spent sort of 3 or 4 years in a job, now realize that Australia is somewhere that they want to stay, but there's no real way for them to secure that sort of future in Australia outside of having to completely change their career and sort of restart that visa process again. And it's something that I didn't think about when I came here at all. Like I was so naive and was convinced that I was like, I'll find a job and I'll get sponsored and that'll be completely fine. And I had to sort of had to navigate all of that not sort of happening on day one, which I thought was going to happen. So I think just from my own experience, and I think a lot of people do sort of go through that, of finding themselves in a position of wanting to stay, but being really limited by their visa. So that's the first thing that I would always tell people to think about.
How can people find out how they can avoid those, because for example, I wouldn't have thought that recruiting would have been an industry where it's difficult to say get PR. Like how can people find out what industries have good pathways and what industries don't?
There's a couple of pretty good websites that sort of list the types of roles that are eligible for permanent residency. So I definitely tell people to do the thing that I didn't do before I moved over here and look at those jobs. I think talking to migration agents, like there's loads of them out there that would have a chat. There's an amazing Facebook group called Irish Around Sydney, and if you just post in that anything that you want to know about moving to Sydney, people will respond. And I think people are really willing to help other people that have gone through the move. So don't be afraid to just put yourself out there, reach out to people, and just ask questions.
And what other advice would you have for people who've moved country? It can be to Australia or anywhere.
And this is probably advice for people that have been here a little bit longer. But I feel like I'm at the point now, and a few of my other friends are at the point where you sort of feel like there's a decision that you need to make, and the decision is really, do I stay, or where do I want to settle long term? And it's hard. Like it's you've put the effort into building a life here. You have family at home. There's kind of push and pull in two directions. And the bit of advice that I would give is to reframe that decision that you feel that you have to make, and think about how you can just give yourself options. And one of those options is your permanent residency. Permanent residency doesn't have to mean that you stay in Australia forever. It just means you have the option to come back. The other option is a job or, you know, an industry that you can easily transfer to another country. For me, aircraft leasing, really, you know, those opportunities are concentrated in Ireland. They're concentrated in parts of Asia. There's no opportunities in Australia. So I sort of experienced moving to another country and being really limited by my job opportunities and having to sort of rethink what I did with my career. And you can sort of apply that to anything. Like even if you decide you want to buy a house in Australia, that doesn't have to mean that you live in Australia forever. It just means you have a house here. So again, I think people sort of get caught up in that decision that they feel that they have to make. And I would say, don't worry too much about it, because like, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen in the next 5 years. You might move home now and you might decide that, you know, when you have kids and they grow up and they move to Australia, you might decide that that's the point that you want to move back. And you just never know where life is going to take you. But just by setting yourself up so that you have those options, I think that's the way to sort of think about it. When
you moved here, did you move here with a friend group?
Yes. Yeah, I had a few friends that were here and a few followed me, and they're still kind of some of the main people that I hang out with now. And there's real comfort in that. Like it's great having people that know you well and that you can, you know, you kind of don't have to, it's kind of like it's an easy way to meet people because you meet their friends. But I've also made loads of new friends as well. So, and I think it's nice to have both. It's nice to have the people that have known you for 4 years, and it's nice to have the people that have known you for 15.
And the people that you've met here, has that been largely like through work, or how have you kind of met those people and become friends with them?
I think it's been, and it's a funny thing about, like, I was at a friend's birthday the other day, and it's such a random group of people that was in there, and the question always comes back to, you know, how do you know this person? And it's like, oh, we used to work together, or oh, we're in the surf club together, or, you know, I just met her through this friend. And I think when you come to Australia and when you move to a new country, it kind of feels like you're going back to primary school or going back to a new school, and it's like really awkward at the start, and you have to do the whole like making friends thing. But again, it's such a good opportunity to meet new people. But I think you have to, you just really have to put yourself out there, and you have to be open to the awkwardness of the first couple of months when you trying to make friends, and it's crap sometimes, but it's just part of the process that you have to do, you know.
And when I first moved here for university back in like 2014, and if I look back at like the people who I was hanging out with then, I was like, I was never going to be friends with them, but I just needed somebody to hang out with like the first month or so that I was over here. And it was like, you know, through them, maybe I met somebody else, and I was like, okay, and then eventually become with them. But moving countries, actually, it's a double-edged sword, I think, from a friend's perspective, because on one hand, it's this opportunity to meet new people who you are friends with because you share values with, not just you share like a history with. But then the hard thing is like you are starting oftentimes from scratch, and I think that can be very challenging for some people. And I think a lot of people can move here with like a friend group, or if they know they're only going to be here for a few years, then like maybe they're not that worried about it. But like I do think it can be something that people don't talk about as much, but like it can actually be tough to make, because I think what I think I find is like it can be, especially because like Sydney, and you know, if you live in Bondi, it's like a fairly social space, and there's enough Irish around that like you'll have casual friends like fairly easily, like people who you can go and have go to a party with or whatever else. But like I think like what I've noticed is those really close friends that you have from home, it's very easy to take them for granted, and like building them up in a new country can take like a lot of time. And I think people underestimate that. And
it's the difference between people that you do things with and people that you have a really close connection with. And it's hard to put people from one group to the other, and you need to you need to be a bit vulnerable, you know, and you need to kind of allow space for that to happen. And I even had a friend the other day who was telling me that she was at some party, and there was someone that she spoke to for like 5 minutes, but she was like, I just really liked them, and I really liked how I felt around them. So she like reached out to them afterwards on Instagram or got their number or something and was like, hey, do you want to just like go for a coffee? And she was like, I felt so awkward. And she was like, it was like I was asking somebody on a date, but I actually just wanted to be their friend. And this person is in their 30s. And it's like, but now she's had this amazing friendship that she's got from it. And the other person was, kind of flattered by it, I think, a little bit. And making friends as an adult is I think probably harder than when you're a kid, because when you're a kid, you're probably less awkward and, it's kind of what you do. But I think, and to your point as well, I think the other thing is that, like you said, when you're an adult, you kind of know who you are a little bit better, and the type of people that you like to spend your time with, and, the type of people that you don't like to spend your time with so much, and you can, you can sort of, like look for those people.
That made me think of this guy I met. I talked to him for like 5 minutes at like a friend's birthday party, like probably a year ago. And I was like, it's one of those moments where I was like, do we just become best friends? But I never reached out to him. So like, he's like, I got like a Facebook friend request from him, and I never reached out to him. And like, I actually should have, because I should have.
It's not too late.
Yeah, it's not. I'll go find him in my Facebook friends.
I actually had a friend of mine used there's actually so Bumble, the dating app, has like a finding friends part of it, and it's called Bumble BFF. And a friend of mine had used it, and she was like, yeah, like I met a few people on it, and it was great. This is when I like first moved to Sydney, and I was like, right, okay, I'm gonna try this. It's really weird because you're on basically a dating app trying to make friends. But I was like, fuck it, I'll go, and this guy seemed really nice. So I was like, yeah, let's just go hang out and have a coffee. And we had a coffee, and I was like, there's just something off about this. Like, he was really nice, but I was like, there's just something's off. And then he messaged me on he followed me on Instagram there and then, and messaged me afterwards. And I looked at his Instagram and realized he was like a multi-level marketing person in one of these like pyramid schemes that he was trying to recruit me. I think it was Herbalife or one of those, and he was trying to recruit me into it. So I'm like, you probably won't have that particular experience, but part of the journey of trying to make friends as an adult is you're going to have people that you're like, actually definitely not going to be friends with them. So I'm not going to like plug Herbalife or anything in this, because I very much cut him off at the time.
I have to give that man so much respect. Yeah. He's on Bumble BFF, trying to run a Herbalife pyramid scheme. Okay, I've got a couple more questions before we finish up. What do you do? What are some things that you do outside of work that you get happiness from, that you get meaning from?
I'd always stress when people ask me this question, because I'm like, I don't have like this really interesting hobby where I love 19th century artwork, or I do kite surfing or something interesting. Like, I just don't. But the things that I do actually love doing in my spare time, like I just love hanging out with my friends, and I love, my friends that follow me on Instagram give me shit for posting sunrise photos in the morning at Bronte Beach, and it's the same thing every day. But I just love being down there before work. I love going down there with my friends, having a swim, sitting around having a coffee afterwards. It's funny, I love seeing the same people down there every single day, and people from all walks of life. Like the four years that I've been here, I remember when I just moved here, I saw a dad that was down there, like a single dad that was down there with his newborn baby. And I go down there every day for a swim, and I've seen that girl grow up, and she's now this like 4.5-year-old kid that goes down there every morning with her dad. And there's people that are, there's elderly people that are down there that go swimming every morning, that chat to you. There's people that have passed away sadly during COVID, like from those groups. There's influencers that are down there taking photos, and I'm like, I just get so much energy from being in that place and just seeing people from all different walks of life, and sharing that with my friends who either go there every day with me. So I still not into kite surfing, but I'm like, that's the thing that I love starting my day with. And it's just such an amazing way to start your day. Like I was there the other day, and I was sitting there, we'd gone for a swim, and I was sitting down with two of my friends, and there was like whales. We were having a coffee, and there was whales breaching out in the distance. And I was thinking back to when I lived in Dublin, and I lived and worked in the city centre, and my morning would be like walking along the Liffey in the rain. And I was like, it's just such a different start to my day, and it's just such a different life that I have over here, and that's a huge part of the pull. You know, when people talk about the push and pull of, you know, family in Australia, it's like the life that we have here is like, I feel so lucky and so privileged to be able to do that every day, because it's so special.
Yeah, it's true. I think that's a really underrated thing to do, is to do something, whether it's going to the beach, but do the same thing every day at roughly the same time, because I basically go to the same coffee shop every morning, but I sit down there for like half an hour or an hour, like read, write, whatever else it is, and it's so nice because, you know, the first week maybe you see the same people, maybe you don't, whatever else. The second week you start to recognize some people coming back, or you start to recognize their dogs, whatever else. You start going there for a few months, it's like, you know everybody. You know all the baristas, they know you can have a chat with them every morning, you can have a chat with the people who are coming in, you know all their dogs' names, and it's actually it's really nice. And it's like, I've talked about this before, but like the idea of having like a third space, like somewhere outside your home, outside your work, where you can hang, you can meet people. Sure, like they're not your best friends, like some of them you actually mightn't still even know their names, even though you know them really well, but you can just have a chat with them, and I think that's a really nice thing to do. And for you, that's obviously the beach. You've been doing it a lot longer than I've been going to the coffee shop, but like that sounds really cool. And the fact that you've seen somebody grow from like a newborn kid to like 4.5 is like,
and this guy with his kid, I've never spoken to him, but I was sitting at a restaurant with my partner one day, and we were having dinner, and he was sitting at the table next to us on a first date. And like my partner was sitting next to me, and I was like, shh, like I need to listen to their conversation, because I need to make a decision about whether this person is good enough for him, because I've never spoken to him, but I was like, but I've seen him raise his kid every day down at that beach, and I was like, she's not good enough for him.
I thought you were going to like jump into the conversation, like go to her. It's just like, just so you know, this guy is a great dude. He's down there every morning with his kid going for a swim. Like, super, Chris. This is, I think, really good place to leave it. Thanks so much for coming on. I had a blast. We covered a fairly wide range of topics, from, you know, morning routines to aircraft leasing to New South Wales government. So I really appreciate it.
That's all right. Glad to do it.
So I hope you enjoyed that chat that I just had with Chris. I learned a lot from it. Certainly did. He's a super interesting guy. I think he's very thoughtful. Like, you can see that he thinks a lot about the decisions that he's made, and also about the advice that he would give to other people. If you want more content like this, and you want to just stay up to date with when new episodes are being released, you can follow me on socials. So on Instagram, it's 2roadspod. And then on LinkedIn, just get me on my personal profile, which is Steve Duke. Apart from that, I'll see you next week for episode 19 of the 2 Roads Pod. Commander,